Welcome to Book Solve and to Book 8 in the 100 Great Reads series. And this time I'm especially excited to be talking about what was one of my very first picks for the list when I was compiling the list. Paul Auster has been one of my favourite authors for a long time now, ever since I first read his New York trilogy. And I was immediately entranced by his approach to fiction, how he imbues it with a cool metaphysical tone and an idiosyncratic noir style. And his trope of playing with authorship, identity, and the very nature of storytelling has always been fascinating for me. I like being given a view under the hood of authorship and to feel that the author's trying to convey something both of themselves and their understanding of the world and of the absurdity of writing, the futility of it, I suppose, in some ways. And in my opinion, Auster is a master of fiction because despite his somewhat austere and accessible text, and although he retains his idiosyncratic stylistic grace, it's not just mere literary trickery. It still engages the reader emotionally, I feel. And Auster recognises that life's not driven by fate, but is interrupted and steered by random events, and his novels will suddenly veer off into another direction rather than following the well-worn paths of fictional narratives. His very last novel, Baumgartner, concludes with the protagonist, Cy. He's just crashed his car off the road late at night in the middle of nowhere. And he stumbles around and he spots a light at a isolated house, and goes up to the door and knocks, and that's where the novel finishes. It seems I was really saddened to hear of Paul Auster's death last year. I was very fortunate to at least have had him sign a book for me after he spoke at a literary festival in Cheltenham. And it just seemed to me that that door ready to be opened as the last act of it was a very fitting termination to his literary output, not knowing what's on the other side, what new adventure is going to open up for him. But the New York trilogy isn't the book, nor is Baumgartner, the book that I've chosen to talk about here at length. I've read pretty much all of his novels, I think, and the one that I love most is this one. The Book of Illusions. And like many of his novels, the Book of Illusions deals with loss and disappearance. At the outset of the book, the protagonist, David Zimmer, an intellectual, as normal for an Auster character, professor of comparative literature, has suffered the tragic death of his wife and child in an aeroplane accident. And his grief's had a devastating effect on his life. He's become a recluse in his Vermont home, takes to heavy drinking, and even considered the possibility of suicide. And then, by chance, which, as I say, is one of Auster's recurring themes, that something happens by chance, he watches part of a silent film starring Hector Mann on television. Hector Mann's a a made-up silent film character. And Zimmer becomes obsessed with the idea of researching the life of man who vanished in 1929 at the height of his career. He was a silent film comedian in Hollywood, and he'd made 12 films, all well regarded, and he was seen as a rising star and often compared to Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin. And his disappearance was abrupt, total, and without explanation. And his very final film is entitled Mr. Nobody. This is a plot that is typical of Auster, and surely no coincidence that the names of the two main characters, Zimmer and Mann, make up the real name of Bob Dylan, who of course also went mysteriously missing after a motorcycle accident in the early part of his career. And that was a sort of minor reason why the novel stayed with me, I suppose. But the other one was that I, like Zimmer, am fascinated by the pathos of the early black and white silent comedy films. The melancholy and vulnerability of the stars as they go through their pratfalls and their wonderfully exuberant slapstick routines, and gives the films a balletic feel, I think, and the deadpan expressions and graceful gestures of the characters lend to the films a tone of purity and of emotional sadness. The films feel like they exist in a forgotten and lost world of a nostalgia for something that never truly existed, but feels like the physical embodiment of the adult world as it should be. The one that you imagined as a child, where danger and peril is playful and harmless, and where events spiral out of control but are nonetheless reassuring and without consequence. When not only does gentleness and naivete win out over anger and cruelty, but violence itself becomes weightless. And that's why the Book of Illusions resonates so much with me. But let's take a look at a few of the extracts that show how Paul Auster handles that material. Zimmer tells us of that moment when he was watching television and the film Hector Mann's appeared on the screen. It was that moment, during the first minutes of Hector Mann's performance, that something shifted inside me. I stopped thinking about myself, and for the first time in months, I was able to look at the world without crying. The movie was called Two Left Feet, and I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, at the antics of this small, dark-haired man in his ill-fitting white suit. There was a nimbleness to him, a physical grace that bordered on the uncanny. He didn't so much move as glide. Each gesture had been honed to perfection, each stumble and pratfall timed to a millisecond. And yet, beneath the exuberance and precision, there was something wounded about him, something profoundly vulnerable. You could see it in his eyes, that mixture of mischief and sorrow, the flickering intelligence masked by a mask of idiocy. He wanted to laugh, yes, but he also wanted you to know that he was human. Zimmer describes man in the film Mr. Nobody in elegiac tones. By this time in his career, man's performances had settled to a subdued rhythm, and his mastery of his craft had reached its zenith. And Auster writes, in Mr. Nobody, his movements are unnaturally slow, as if he were performing underwater. Everything is restrained, controlled to the edge of stillness, and yet there's never a loss of clarity, never a false step. The gestures are minimal but precise, and in their very slowness they seem to draw attention to themselves, so make the viewer more conscious of every flicker and blink, every infinitesimal change of facial expression. He no longer attempts to dazzle with speed or agility. Instead, he has become a master of hesitation, a performer who can say more by doing almost nothing than others can say by doing everything. And in the novel, Zimmer mythologizes man, and Auster's fictional reconstructions of Hector Mann's 12 silent films that he's left behind him are among the most inventive and haunting parts of the Book of Illusions, I think. Each film has a distinct tone and concept, and also Auster uses them to showcase different aspects of silent comedy as an emotional and philosophical art. So, for example, in The Shoemaker's Wife, there's a balletic rhythm to the way Hector navigates the cramped little shop. Never still, never chaotic, just an unbroken flow of careful motion. It's comic choreography at its most refined. Every motion has purpose, but nothing feels mechanical. You feel like he's inventing the world by moving through it. And another, A Bowl of Oranges. In a long, static shot, Hector peels an orange with the solemnity of a monk in prayer. Each gesture is exact, and even if the slip of skin has been, as if even the slip of skin has been rehearsed 100 times. The comedy does not come from what he does, but from the enormous seriousness with which he does it. The third film, Why Go On Living? This is the darkest of the 12, and Hector moves like a ghost in his own film. His footsteps make no noise. His body seems almost translucent, as if filmed through gauze. He performs no stunts, no slapstick, only quiet, sorrowful tasks that lead nowhere. And the final film here that we've got in this extract is Out of the Tunnel. The whole film takes place in and around a train station, with Hector endlessly walking through corridors and platforms that keep turning into one another. He's always in motion, but never gets anywhere. His steps are light, restless, but his face remains calm, even amused. And I think they're wonderful. Obviously, Auster describes these films in greater detail than the little extracts we've had here. But anyway, in the plot, eventually a letter arrives claiming to be from Hector Mann, who has been presumed dead for many years, and it sends David Zimmer off on a trip to an arid, isolated location in New Mexico. Here's an extract from that bit. Zimmer watched Hector Mann as he stood quietly beneath a wide, pale sky. The desert stretched out in every direction, a canvas of ochre and rust, dust swirling softly in the warm breeze. Man's movements were deliberate but effortless, as if he belonged to this place more than anywhere else. It's a strange kind of silence out here, Man said, turning to look at Zimmer with a faint smile. You start to hear things you've never noticed before. The whisper of the wind, the distant call of a bird. It makes you pay attention. Zimmer nodded, feeling the weight of the quiet settle around them. It's peaceful, he said, but also strange, like the world is holding its breath. Man's eyes lingered on the horizon. That's maybe where the real stories live, in the spaces between words, in the silence. Well, I love this book, and I'd say that out of all Paul Auster's novels, if you're someone that actually hasn't taken to his writing and don't like it very much, this is the one to try. It's the one you're most likely to warm to. Anyway, that's it for this entry into 100 Great Reads on Booksolve. So, cheery ho, and happy reading to you all. Bye.